Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Yasha from Student Success Team. First of all, thank you for joining on time. Yeah, today's session will be on data science for product management, which will be conducted by Mirza and Ram. We will going to start the session shortly. Just wait for others. If you are not able to see the screen of speaker or not able to hear him, kindly rejoin. I repeat, if you are not able to see the screen of speaker or not able to hear him, kindly rejoin. If you still face any issue, kindly refer to link which I'm posting to chat box. Thank you.
Okay, so we have Ram has joined as well. I think we have a few learners as well. Team could start in the next within a minute, right? Let's start in a minute. It's 3:04 already. Right. Isha, I think we'll begin. Ram is also here. I think we have a few learners coming in as well, right? And,
Okay, sure. Ram, good afternoon. Welcome to the session.
Hey, hi. Nice to be here.
I'll start my video as well, right? In case I'm not sure how this platform really works, but let me know if you guys are able to see me.
Yeah, we're able
Yeah.
to.
All right. Okay. So I'll begin then. Right then. Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining us. First of all, happy Ganesh Chaturthi and Vinayak Chaviti, both terms, and welcome to this session. In this session, it's a little different kind of a session today, I suppose, compared to what you've been having so far. And in this session, we're talking about how a PM can work with a data science team, how they collaborate with data science team, how they engage with them, right? What the different considerations are, and more importantly, how they all come together to solve problems, right? For this session, the speakers would be Mirza Rahim, who is me, and we also have Ram Narayan. And we both, we'll introduce ourselves in a bit, but the interesting part is we both have worked together for quite some time at Flipkart. So you'll see some synergies here and there. But yeah, I mean, we've been both worked together, and I suppose it'll be a good thing to hear from both of us. And we have a lot of common experiences and common learnings for us to share with this entire group. Okay? So
And it's nice to see your face, Rahim, after such a long time.
oh, yeah, it's been how long is it? A year or so, right?
Thanks to Corona, yeah, it's fine. Let's move ahead, yeah.
No, actually, and I had a different team and so on, and we probably didn't connect recently, right? So I mean, since the team change and so on, so it's been a while. Yeah, I don't see you though. Where are you? Oh, you're there. Okay. Oh, I see you now. Now I see you. All right. All right. So yeah, so we have Ram and Rahim both. So this is all in the hands of higher powers now. But we'll all introduce ourselves a little later. But I'll just set the broad context for this entire or the agenda for this entire session. Right. Today's agenda is, first of all, we talk of what it means or what are the major steps in solving a problem, right? Solving a business problem around a product, right? Solving a problem using data science. Now, what does it mean to solve that problem? The broad high-level steps, or how we think of it in a structured problem-solving approach. Then we also take a case study to make all the examples or all the discussions we have to make them more concrete. We'll have a case study. What we'll also do is in the entire process, right? The different kind of steps that you will see in this entire process. The interesting bit is you will see two different points of views or take 2 points of views from 2 different people, right? So you have a point of view from a product manager as to what the product manager thinks when the product manager looks at this particular area, right? What his or her considerations are, versus a data scientist. So what the data scientist's considerations are, right? And so at each step, this is important because you will see that both of these agents have to come together to solve the problem, right? They have to collaborate. And it'll be interesting to see, do they look at the same thing very differently? Do they diverge? Or are there a lot of synergies over there? Right? That should be something interesting to look. We'll also look at another example, smaller example, where we will see how you decide who does what. There could be some places where there is heavy overlap. So how do you decide where is the line, who does what, and so on. Right? After discussing all of these, you'll also realize that there are certain areas where there could be conflicts. A PM thinks differently. A data scientist has different considerations, right? So what happens? What kind of conflicts are very, very common kind of conflicts, and how they can be resolved. And finally, you'll have, from a PM's perspective, how a PM works through all of this, right? How the PM brings together all of this, works with different kind of stakeholders, and what this PM's mantra of success is, right? So that's the agenda for today. And with that, I would ask Ram to introduce himself first.
Hi guys, this is Ram Narayan. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So I work as a product manager with Flipkart. I've worked across multiple products, starting from consumer-facing products to building products for our marketplace sellers. Worked on building platform products as well as a lot of data science-based products. I worked with Rahim a great deal, and it's been a kind of a very good learning experience for me. Even within data science, there are a lot of different kinds of problem statements I've worked on, from automating certain business processes to using data science as a medium for creating products which are not possible without data science, which kind of creates delight for the customer, to actually solving stakeholder needs, again through data and insights that we can derive from internal sources as well as external platforms, right? So I hope some of these learnings I'll be able to share during this session, and you guys kind of gain some knowledge from it. Yeah. Thanks, Rahim. Take over.
Yeah. So as you can infer, I am Rahim. My name is also there in the image, right? So about me, so I've been working in this field of data science or advanced analytics or whatever it is called, really. But I've been working with data for about more than 10 years now, very closely with businesses, working closely with product managers, and or at least how I define my role is through solve business problems through data, right? So I don't see myself as a coder or something. I see myself as someone who solves problems using data. Right, and in this process, I've had to interface with the business people, which is either the business finance teams or the pure business people who sell stuff on Flipkart, right? Who decide what to buy, where to buy, and so on. I've also worked a great deal with product managers in improving product and experience for the customer, and I've worked with Ram Narayan as well at Flipkart for quite a while, and we have done together some good data science, delivered some data science based products or solutions for the whole reviews and ratings and question answers and whatnot, right? So been here in this place for a while, and the reason I feel I can come here and tell you something is purely because I've spent so much time with working closely with PMs. I believe there is some perspective which I can provide as to what I think is important from a problem solutioning perspective, and how I think data science teams can engage with PMs, or even what my expectations from a product manager, right? So all of this, if you will be eventually working with a data science team or an advanced analytics team or whoever it is, you would probably want to hear from what your potential stakeholders think and what they expect from you, right? So hopefully all that learning will help you embark on this journey a little better. Okay? So with that, is there any questions so far, guys? If there are any questions, please let us know. I probably will not be looking at the chat so much, but in case there's any questions, yeah, look at. I think let me just check if there's any doubts. Yeah, please. By the way, please do use the whole doubts section very well. It's very easy to miss the chat, but the doubts section essentially is important because we can look at the kind of questions are there, which we have answered, which you have not answered, right? And by the way, for this whole session to work really well, it's very important that you guys interact with us, because you'll realize this is not a say a standard where we tell you this is what it theoretically is. This is more around us having a discussion, understanding the considerations and so on. Right? So it'll be important that you also engage with us. You also give us your points of view. Right? So yeah, if there are any questions at any point, please ask us on chat and we will address them all. Right? Okay, so since there are none, let me go on. I'll start with this whole problem solving framework, and then and this is just again one perspective, and of course want Ram to bring his perspective on this as well. But the way we look at this entire problem solving piece, and importantly, problem solving in a data environment, right, where you are making decisions through data, not data driven, but at least data informed solutions, right? So we while there's many ways to look at it, there is a more structured process, and I'm not sure if some of you realize that what these steps written over here, right, these are somewhat similar to a very popular framework out there. It is called the CRISP DM framework. It is the cross industry standard process for data mining, right? It says data mining or data modeling or whatever, but essentially, if you are building a solution which has data at its core using data science techniques, then what is the general process? Okay, and the reason why we're talking about this framework or these steps is these are like completely industry agnostic. You see, it's cross industry standard, right? So this same thing, the same framework can be applied across industries. So that's the reason this is very relevant, regardless of which industry or which domain you are in right now. As long as you're working with data, you can follow these 5 high-level steps to solve the problem in a more structured manner. That's how we also either explicitly or implicitly solve this. I can vouch for this that at Flipkart or at many companies, even though they don't formally divide these milestones or steps like this, right? But somewhere or the other, this kind of a framework is very implicit to the way we work. It is sort of ingrained in the way we approach things. Okay? There's a systematic approach to solving problems. So in this whole problem solving framework, the very first part, which is a very critical part, and actually all these steps are very critical, but the very first step is understanding the problem. All right, we will discuss all of these in detail as to what we mean. Right now, I'll just give you a very, very high level overview. The very first step is even understanding, right? What is the problem? What is the problem statement? What is the extent of it, right? Is it even a problem? That's your starting point. You always start there, right? Then once you have a fair amount of understanding of the problem, sufficient for you to proceed or for you to attempt solving it, right? You start with the data gathering and data exploration exercise. And this, we will talk about all of these, how each of these come together, which of these have problems, what kinds of issues, and what are the considerations, and so on. So in the second step, once you've understood the problem at a high level, you start gathering the data, you start looking at the data, exploring. In the process, you increase your understanding of the problem. And you also, maybe you had some hypotheses going in, right? Maybe this is why the problem is coming. Maybe that is why the problem is coming. This is a good place for you to even validate those hypotheses. Or maybe looking at the data, you generate new hypotheses, right? So you first understand the problem, then to understand it better or to find the right ways to solve it, you go into data gathering and data analysis and exploration. Then after this, after you have understood it well enough, you have come to a point where you can confidently say, or relatively confidently say, that now I can create the solution using that data, right? This is the modeling part of it. Okay. Now, contrary to what many people think or what many people take an approach, right? They think that once I build the solution, once the model is done, it's over. My solution is ready. But that's far from it. This is somewhere in the middle. right? Once you have made your solution, which could be a small analysis, it could be like a very sophisticated state-of-the-art model as well. Once you have built this, you have to ensure, you have to validate that this solution is useful, that the solution will give you benefit, and the solution will not cause any counterproductive or detrimental impact. Okay, so then you go to the solution validation phase. Only after you have done all of these steps, only after you have built a model and you have validated the model, that the model works, right? It will give you the benefit. Only then do you go ahead and deploy. So you don't just test it out in the random, throw it out in the wild, you validate, and only when you are certain that this works, you go towards a deployment phase. And from now on, it's out there, it's working in the actual world, right? It's out there in the real world. You look at the model, you see how it performs, you monitor, you maintain as well, right? And then you keep on, maybe either you come back, improve this problem area, or you move on to some other problem, right? So depending on your application, your use case, it changes how much time you spend on each of these, or what depth you go in each of these. But largely, this is the kind of framework you would want to look at. You begin with understanding the issues, you gather the data, you understand it better, you build your own hypotheses, and then you come to a point where you say, I will build the solution. That is the modeling part. Then it goes to the solution validation, right? And then it goes into deployment and monitoring after you've realized, or after you've established that this would work, right? So this is the entire process. And this is, when we say this is the process, this is not the process for a data scientist or for a product manager. We're talking of a general process which we together collaboratively follow, right? And we'll see how we all come together in each of these steps. Ram, do you have anything to add on this?
Hey, no, I think we are good to go. Just that I saw a few people kind of asking a few questions on the doubt section. So
Sure.
Probably we'll try to answer those. And some of these might get addressed during the course of this session, so I'll leave that aside. But the first question was around, how do you decide that a particular problem needs data science solution and not the other solutions? Very good question. I think what we need to keep in mind is we start off with a business problem always, right? And so the solution might be possible even without using data science, right? But having said that, there are a few thumb rules that we generally kind of use to decide whether to use data science or not, right? And generally speaking, in most industry practical scenarios, what happens is you start off building something which is simple, which is easy to build and easy to roll out, and which kind of helps you test the hypothesis quite fast enough, right? So you could make some certain assumptions based on your business knowledge, create certain rules or hard code some of the things, and put it out as an experiment to the real users and check if it works or not, right? And if it works, you start investing it in further, either making complex rules or building data science solution, whatever works, right? Now, where to use data science? There are like few case scenarios where we use data science generally. Like one is where probably rules become too many or too complex, so that for a human being defining them structurally without them creating any kind of conflicting scenarios becomes difficult. Then you probably employ data science so that it can help you structure the problem well. Second scenario could be where there is a lot of data to play with. For example, let's say recommendation systems, right? There are so many users, there are so many products or movies in Netflix, whatever, right? So it's in both sides of the coin. It's a matching problem where you're trying to match users to movies, but in both the sides there are millions and millions of data points, right? And it's virtually impossible for someone to manually look at them and frame rules, right? That is where again data science comes into play, where the scale of the data is simply huge enough, right? So these are some of the scenarios where you need to use data. We'll have to think because it is not solvable through traditional means, you'll have to deploy data science. There are other scenarios as well. If time permits, you can go over the other scenarios later during the discussion. Yeah, the second part was what's the best time to involve a data scientist, right? I think from a PM perspective, what I have observed and learned is, first, as a PM, what you need to understand is clearly understand what is the business problem you're trying to solve and what is the criticality of it, right? Once you have that in mind, you do a check, like in the previous question, do we need to use data science? And if yes, then you start involving data science from the very beginning, right? Because if you start involving data science from the very beginning, then you start understanding what is the business problem you're trying to solve and what is the criticality of it, right? Once you have that in mind, you do a check, like in the previous question, do we need to use data science? And if yes, then you start involving data science from the very beginning, right? Because even while defining how do we develop a data science solution, the data scientist might have a lot of opinion and viewpoints as to how can we refine it further, right? So the more earlier you involve him, the better it is, right? But before involving it, you need to have clarity in your mind as to what business problem you're trying to solve, and we'll go over it in a bit further detail in a future slide. The third question is around how proficient should a PM be with tools like Mixpanel and Google Analytics. I think they should be really, really proficient, right? Because the thing that you need to understand is, as a PM, a majority of your time gets spent in looking at data, uncovering patterns, looking at product metrics, right? And for like probably spend 30 to 40 minutes of your daily time in looking at data, right? And for each of these things, you cannot have a dependency on a data scientist because they would also be occupied in doing much more critical and much more complex problem solving, right? So some of the basic needs that you have on a recurring basis, on a daily basis, you would have to be self-sufficient in looking at these tools and understanding the data. So you need not do coding or anything, but you need to understand how these tools work. I hope those answer your question. Yeah. Go ahead, continue, Rahim.
Yeah, so just to add on the second one, right? What's the best time to involve a data scientist? I think just to add some perspective, or at least my experiences here, right? Even in the product side, right, you will have certain areas where the need or everything is so data critical. So I'll give you the example of something like pricing. A pricing area is an area where, right? Everything has to be data. Okay, it's a very heavily driven by math kind of a situation. Okay, whereas something which is very close to a general user experience, right? What he looks at, what he can interact with, that's a little different. Where you can still have a lot of gut feeling and instinct. This is what it is. But around pricing, really, unless you have built a great understanding of it, it is heavily, say, optimization driven, heavily number driven, and so on. Now, in that kind of a situation, right, it such a place, it's always a good idea to have either your analytics team or your data science team engaged right in the beginning. In fact, in some of these cases, what will happen is it is the analytics team who may come to you saying that we think this is something of a big problem for you to solve. Or in our analysis, these have come out to be big areas worth solving or worth of solutioning for, right? So the way it will work is, PM himself will have a vision, right? This is how I see my product evolving. This is this is the roadmap for this is the 5-year plan. And then you will have your teams giving inputs to you, or you'll have the data science team coming to you, you'll have the analytics teams coming to you, and they will tell you this is what we need to solve, right? So you have to bring this all together and probably take a call, prioritize, and so on, right? So this, Ram, correct me if I'm wrong anyway. Okay.
I think I'm good. I'm like, yeah.
All right. So with that, then I think this is the overall problem-solving framework that we will talk about. Now, to make this, like I said, to make this all very concrete, we will take an example, a particular case study, and this is a product-related thing. So I would ask Ram to introduce the case study and talk of this experience here.
Hey, yeah, sure. So, like there are multiple data science problems that we. Hey, Rahim, were you saying something?
No, I'm not saying anything.
There are multiple areas where we use data science today in e-commerce and other industries as well. This is just one of the problems that we face in a customer journey today. So if you think about it, one of the primary challenges a user faces while trying to shop online is they do not have access to touch and feel the product, right? And that makes it really difficult for the user to decide whether he should buy, whether he should trust buying online, whether he should take a risk with buying this product online. So it kind of creates apprehension in the user's mind, right? And that is why customer reviews exist today, where the intent of customer reviews is to provide some community feedback so that people can look at it, research and know more about the product and decide whether to buy or not to buy, right? And the intent of having reviews is not to increase sales for the platform, but to help the user, guide the user in making the right decision, right? And that is where as platforms, like as PMs, when we build reviews or any other product like that, we keep that final customer need or business problem in mind and try to solve for it, right? And when you think about reviews, there are multiple problems that come associated with it. In a business scenario, you have to think about how do I make sure every product that I'm selling on the platform has enough number of reviews so that I can actually look at them and make decisions. I have to think about if a product has thousands and millions of reviews, how do I surface them in the right way? How do I identify which reviews are informational, which reviews are the most relevant for a particular user, and show them upfront so that the users who are looking at them can make the decision of buying the product or not buying the product in the most convenient and fastest way, right? So that is the core objective. How do you make users make the decision in the fastest possible way, and the decision should be as right as possible, right? So having said that, we come up with multiple problems from a business scenario, right? One of the problems that we are going to talk about today is given reviews, how do we rank them, or how do we surface them on the product detail space so that we help the user today, right? So having said that, like, we would like to understand from you, like, look at this page, and based on your experience of shopping online as well, can you tell us some ideas, give us some ideas, or identify some of the issues that exist today on the review section, or areas where we could improve reviews today? Just kind of jot down your ideas in the chat section or wherever need, right? Just kind of think loudly and share your thoughts. We don't see anything in the chat section yet. So, Rahim, are you on mute?
Oh yes. Oh, sorry, I was on mute. Yeah. So I was adding that this, by the way, is a very recent snapshot from yesterday. So these are all. This is not dummy data. This is actual snapshots taken yesterday, right? So real experience here. Also, just to add to what Ram was talking about, to maybe better think of these issues or hypotheses, or what could be improved, or think from a customer lens, that customer empathy bit. If you're a customer
And guys,
trying to look at a
we
product,
want the session to be as interactive as possible. So if you guys chip in and kind of share your thoughts, it will actually make it a better learning experience for you folks as well.
yeah, it will be good. In fact, for us also, it will be very good to hear from you, right? If you, the kind of things you bring in as a customer are different from what we already think, right? So please think from a customer lens as well. If do you have, Ram mentioned the objective, right? That as a customer, you should have sufficient information to quickly decide whether you want to buy this or not, right? So think from that lens, and just put your thoughts down there. What do you think is problematic? What do you think can be improved?
So one of the things mentioned in the chat section is how do we identify and differentiate between genuine reviews and fake reviews? Yes, it's a huge problem that we deal with today in the online space. Any other thoughts? Any other views on how can we improve it? Picture of product by customer, location where product was delivered for the reviewer. Awesome. Yeah, valid points. Anything else? Maybe 30 more seconds. We can wait and then we'll take it up.
Any issues you
Review
notice,
rate.
any inconsistencies, anything?
Look at the screenshots that we have shared here, and do you find anything which is wrong?
Or anything as a customer which will confuse you, right? Or which is inconsistent for you?
Yeah, I think we have got enough inputs and rightly called out. There are multiple problems here, not just with the screenshots, but generally speaking also. And many of you have already touched upon those in the
Okay.
chat section. A few things just to let you highlight, right? Rahim, can you present the screen, please? Yeah.
Yeah.
So first thing, right? If you look at the summary view, the product has been rated as 3.7 out of 5. So if you think about it, it's a pretty decent rating, right? And it's a positive one. But at the same time, only 51% of people are saying that we would recommend this item. It's kind of, it can be slightly inconsistent, right? Where as a user, I see that it's well rated, but no one is recommending me to buy it. That is one problem. Second, as someone has highlighted, the topmost review that is shown here, it says I am not happy, but at the same time, it's rated a 5-star, which means that the rating and the corresponding review are not consistent with each other, right? Uh, and there are multiple other problems like people have talked about, like how do we identify and differentiate between genuine and fake reviews? How do we make sure that the reviews that we are showing here are detailed enough so that and relevant enough for people who are trying to buy, right? Either through the location, through which kind of a user he is, and some of these problems we need to cater to and build for while solving for review presentation and ranking as a problem, right? Which we'll take it as an example and go through the future slides so that we can help you understand how we would have solved it if we were in this place. Yeah, let's move on, Rahim. Do you want to add anything?
No, nothing to add. Actually, you've covered all of them.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So moving
Cool,
on, like we mentioned in the previous slide, right? The first step is
sorry.
understanding the business problem and kind of defining it really well. And that is the core part of what a PM does in a data science problem or in a non-data science world as well. So here we've defined it very clearly. The objective is to help customers make the decision in the fastest possible and most convenient way, right? But along with it, we need to understand the why, how does it impact our business? Why is it critical enough? Now, that is where some of the business metrics come into play. Here, for example, it could mean that people are not converting. We are seeing a lot of visitors, millions of visitors coming to Snapdeal or Flipkart or Amazon, whatever it might be, on a daily basis, but only X% of them are converting and ending up buying the product, and a lot of them are not buying. And one of the possible reasons for them not buying could be this, where looking at reviews, they're not able to make a decision, right? So it is impacting the platform's conversion. So that is where you define how is it impacting our business and how critical is it. Now, to understand how critical it is, you can probably, there are multiple ways to do it, right? For example, when we are probably launching a new category, let's say Snapdeal was doing e-commerce only on large appliances and electronics to begin with. And at some point of time, they launched fashion, lifestyle, clothing, and footwear as a category. And when they benchmarked, say, electronics versus lifestyle, they figured out that electronics has a better conversion versus lifestyle doesn't have a better conversion, right? And let's say there is a random 2 percentage point difference in conversion. If we were to make sure through improvements that the conversion of these two categories are same, it could lead to, say, X amount of incremental GMV for the platform. So that's the business goodness you're trying to arrive at, right? You're trying to benchmark against other categories, or maybe you can benchmark with other platforms. I know that, let's say, Amazon in the US has a typical conversion rate of X%, but Snapdeal as a platform has a conversion rate of Y%. So if I'm able to cover that ground to some amount, then it will lead to so much amount of incremental GMV for the platform. So you define what are the right business metrics. You try to quantify them in terms of the end business goals as to what kind of goodness it can bring in. And that will help you identify the criticality, because as an organization, there are multiple things you're trying to solve. And if you want this to be taken as a priority, where the org as a whole can invest time and assign data scientists and engineering to work on it and solve the problem, which is a resourcing problem in itself, right? You need to, as a PM, you need to define the criticality of the problem and communicate it and align stakeholders about it, right? So these are the things that a PM kind of does in the problem definition part. And as a data scientist, what needs to be done, I think Ravi will talk about it.
Yeah. So from the perspective of a data scientist as well, you'll see that largely, like Ram mentioned, right? It is important that the organization, in fact, including the data scientist team, we feel that this problem is, first of all, important enough, okay, to be solved. And as a data person, I would ask, okay, that is this even a problem? First, you have to prove that this is a problem, right? A data science team will not be convinced if a PM says, I feel this can be done better, or, I would definitely ask, what is the metric? What metric are you comparing? Who are you comparing with? Is that comparison fair, right? So I'll take a very analytical or a data-based approach over here. And I need to be convinced that indeed data also agrees that there is a problem. and this problem can be solved, right? So I would, as a data person, ask for key metrics. What are the metrics you typically track? Which metric would indicate the health? Like Ram mentioned, the platform conversion could be impacted, right? There could be other metrics also. If people find the reviews more useful, they click on the helpful button, or they spend more time on the reading the reviews and so on, right? There could be other metrics. So I would think about what are the different kinds of metrics that I can get and establish that there is a problem. And then I would see, can it be quantified, or can I estimate the payoff? So for, I think, which is something which Ram was hinting at as well, right? If we have to get the company or a lot of people, a lot of resources aligned to this, you have to show that there is a problem which can be solved in a limited time, and it can give you these kind of payoffs. Only then will people pay attention and put their resourcing and time on it. Right? So this is the place where I, in fact, additionally, right, I, as a data scientist, I would also want to understand the nature of the problem, so that I also can somewhere, right, start thinking about generating my hypotheses. Why is this? Is it because am I looking at the right category? That's how you think. You start, thinking in your head. Are you looking at it correctly? Can you look at it better, and so on? Or what are the hypotheses and so on? Right? This is how I would approach this. And additionally, I would also think about, even though it's too early, some of you may think, I would still think about, can this problem be solved at all? Do we even have the data, right? Or will it take 1 year before we can even start getting the data, right? Some of those things are also what will be there in my mind. Okay. Anyone else? I mean, from the audience, that you would like to hear? I mean, is there any comments on this? Any remarks here? Or is there anything you think, from a data understanding point? Any comments, remark, questions, curiosities, anything? Okay, if there's nothing, I'm not sure. I can't see the chat, Ram, but if you... okay, data gathering. Okay, so Surya has a comment saying that data gathering and cleansing can take a while. Surya, it's a good point. In fact, the next slide of it is about the data part, and we will definitely touch upon the practical considerations over there. You rightly said, data itself, people don't really appreciate or understand the significance or the effort sometimes behind getting the data. So, which is why I've mentioned it as a feasibility thing. So we'll come to that in the next slide. Good point, though. So now I'll move to the next slide.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think this is the next part, right? When we define the problem well enough, data scientist is sold on the problem that we're trying to solve. We have alignment with stakeholders. The next part is how do we start thinking about how to solve it, right? Where this is where we get into the how part of it, right? That is where the first step obviously is to understand, in order to build a data science model, what do we have at our hands? Do we have the requisite data or do we not? That is where, as a PM, what you need to first do is form your hypothesis as to why there is a problem, or how could we solve the problem. In this particular case, you can come up with multiple assumptions. For example, let's say there are two user segments. One is a user segment who is really, really research heavy. Like, before making any purchase, I spent like couple of days, 3 days to understand more about the product, because it's a highly involved purchase that I do. Or it could be in categories like large and electronics, which are highly priced items, right? Where I need to know that much amount of details before actually spending my hard-earned money on that, right? There could be another user segment which is not that research heavy. It actually kind of tries to shop very quickly and primarily attracted towards low priced items. So they don't care about the risk involved because they are just buying low priced items. It could be in fashion or any other category, right? So the user behavior in some of these segments could actually vary. And the kind of hypothesis you develop will vary across these user segments. For the first one, for example, you might come with a hypothesis that if I show detailed reviews, which talk about pros and cons of the product, talk about the different features of the product, it might possibly lead to better engagement and better conversion. For the second one, the hypothesis might be that if I show reviews which are very well kind of summarized and have a clear decision that they communicate. Let's say someone is writing that it's a must buy, it's value for money, and you should definitely go about it without thinking. It doesn't necessarily share a lot of details about the product, but it gives you a very clear indication of whether to buy or not. That might actually work for the second user segment that I talked about, right? So as a PM, you need to define and like build your hypothesis based on how better you understand your users by looking at the data and by using your domain expertise and talking to your business stakeholders who are actually dealing with these categories. The second part is then identifying which are the right data sources. Now let's say I come up with this hypothesis. Do I have all the data sources with me? For example, the review content. Do I have how much each review has been voted or unvoted? Do I have how much each review has been read? Do I have knowledge about people who actually read the reviews and converted or didn't convert? All of these will come as inputs when I'm trying to model and trying to optimize for a certain metric. So you have to understand what data sources exist in your system, and wherever data doesn't exist, create ways to generate the data. Either have loops created in your product itself, or analytics kind of instrumented in your product itself, so that you start generating the data now on. Even if you don't have it now, maybe 3 months down the line you'll have it. Or in many cases, you might want to create labeled data set where you're training, like say classification models or anything. You want to use an ops team or some kind of crowdsourcing help to create the data sets which will help you train your models, right? So as a PM, you define what data you need, what do you have today in the platform, what do you not have, and how do you bridge those gaps. And the third part is basically understanding how do we basically understanding the data and identifying, is it noisy, is it not noisy, how is the data quality, how do we identify outliers and kind of filter them out, what are the other kind of data anomalies, like maybe it's sparse data. So have an understanding all of these nuances, and kind of while working with the data scientist, your data scientist will be a prime counterpart here, right? He understands the data better than no one else, right? So only where he needs your help or he needs your inputs, you can come in with your perspective.
Sure. All right. So I'll add my perspective here. So for me, this along with the previous step, or this, if I would say, which is the most important step or the most critical step, I would say this is it. Okay. This, in my experience, can completely say derail your project by either saying that this cannot be solved from the data we have, and we realize that it can only be solved a year later when we have, or 6 months later when we have the data. Or it could also lead to a situation where you realize, when looking at these things further, that the understanding that you had about the problem is wrong. So this can actually overturn the way you are approaching the problem as well. That's how I would look at it. This is a very, very critical step in my mind. This is where I understand the problem much better. Like I get to the extent possible, right? It's like, see, final model building is a very small part in my mind. This right here, right? What is the data telling us? What is the customer behavior telling us, and so on? What is the right data? What should we look at? How do we get the data? Do we have it now, or do I need help from engineering to get me the data, which will come in 2 months? What, right? That is the first part, the data access and when I get it. The second part is once I have the data. And by the way, even the data which I'm looking for, I have to have some hypotheses in my mind. For example, in this reviews example, right? I was talking about, is this really a problem, and so on. After we have done all of that, we have to have some hypotheses. That is this, are certain customer segments finding this useful more than the others? Or is the conversion not too great for, say, some product categories versus the others? Is it because of the nature of the category or the customers, or is it due to both of them, right? Are they engaging better but not buying? Is there trust on the platform? So I would want to look at all these signals. This is a very exhaustive approach, and this is where you can potentially be, like overwhelming as well, because there's just too much to do over here. So here is where you will need the PM's help as well, because as a data scientist, while I may have all the data, I may not have all the say intuition for the customer behavior. So here is where I would reach out to the product manager again and again. This is a very this is a step where you have a lot of high collaboration as well, okay, in parts. So I reach out to the PM. I ask, this is what I see. Does it make sense to you? right? Or is it somewhat of an anomaly, like Ram mentioned, right? So this is where you test all of these things, all of these hypotheses. You look at the data, you generate new hypotheses or new insights, and you may realize that we were looking at this the wrong way. Maybe you need to solve for this, solve for that, and so on. Also, if you guys are aware of how the modeling process or whatever, this also helps you generate features or inputs or factors which will help you build your final solution, right? So as you can see, right, in the previous step and even this step so far, you see that there is a strong overlap in what a data science PM is also trying to get to, what a data scientist is also trying to get to. But it's just the levels at which we are involved with the data is varying. The levels of understanding we have of the customer behavior and intuition on it is varying. But you can sense by now largely there's a lot of overlap in this. The data scientist focuses on more on some things versus the PM. Is there any comment or any question here?
Kind of cannot agree anymore. Like you could sense from what each of us is talking about, there is a lot of overlap. The only difference is the PM continuously kind of uses his domain knowledge and intuition to build hypothesis and kind of guide the discussion in the right direction, and always has the business and customer in mind. Whereas the data scientist has expertise comes in handling data, in extracting insights out of it, and validating the hypothesis. Yeah,
Sure.
Let's move on. Probably I don't see any doubts in this section. Let's move on.
Right.
Yeah, I think the question that has been asked by Samarth, we are going to address that in this slide. So this is the third part, right, where we have understood the business problem. We have understood what is the data that we need to build it. Now we think about actually modeling it, right? And this is where probably data scientist is the primary stakeholder, and he spends a huge amount of time in building the right models and fine tuning them for the right metrics in terms of accuracy or coverage, right? But where does a PM come in here? I think he takes a step back here and he lets data scientists kind of take the lead here. The point of time where the PM comes in is twofold. One, while trying to understand how do these models work and what are their advantages and disadvantages, and kind of discussing and critiquing the data scientist in terms of why did you choose this model, right? Because why this is important is because there are a lot of trade-offs that the data scientist and PM needs to make while building a data science solution, right? For example, one could be, should I go for accuracy or should I go for coverage? In data science terminology, there are some metrics which we call as precision and recall, and quite often they move in opposite directions. If you try to optimize for precision, your recall would go down, and if you try to optimize for recall, your precision would go down. And you have to understand where do we draw the line, what is the right trade-off to kind of accept and move on, right? That is where as a PM you need to take the right decisions, keeping the business objective in mind. Just to give you an example, let's say you are working on content moderation as a use case where you have to flag inappropriate content and let it not published on the platform, right? So because why, if it goes out to the public, it can be a huge PR disaster for the platform. That is where probably as a PM you take a call that it needs to have a good amount of coverage, even if some images which are, or some text reviews which are actually not inappropriate but get filtered out, it's perfectly fine as long as no bad content kind of goes out, right? So that is where you probably decide that my coverage is more important here. In some cases, accuracy might be more important, like probably a recommendation system, right? You want the recommendation to be as accurate as possible so that the probability of the user converting is good enough. So as a PM, you need to come in and make these right trade-offs so that data scientists can actually use those as inputs while building the right models. The second most important thing that as a PM you need to do is, and again, kind of evaluating the models in terms of things like accuracy versus explainability. And many times, your business stakeholders need visibility and transparency into why the output of this model is like this, right? And you need ways to kind of defend the output and answer as to why this happened. That is where explainability comes in and becomes crucial. In some business problems, that might not be required. So again, it's a trade-off that you need to make. And as a PM, you're continuously kind of trying to understand what the data scientist is modeling and nothing beyond kind of that.
Okay, right. So I'll add my side of the considerations, right? So when I look at this, right, and this is where I think all my to prove the metal in a way, right? This is where the problem has been defined largely. This is where we have also good understanding of the problem and the data. Now is the part where you decide what kind of solution do I build, what kind of complexity. Because as you may understand that a solution could be a very simple solution as well, like a very basic model which takes maybe a short time to build. Or it could be, I could take it as a long drawn project which probably takes about a year to solve, right? Which is a very sophisticated, probably very close to state of the art model. So these are the kind of questions now, right? What is the level of solution needed? What is the complexity needed, right? And what is the right, therefore, what is the right modeling technique? And here is where there'll be a lot of constraints. And some of these constraints, I really need to work closely or collaborate with the PM to understand some of these things better. See, I have the data, I have all the intuition and everything, but there are certain aspects. In fact, not just the PM, this is the part where I will also engage with the engineering teams. Okay? Because when building a solution, I also have to think about, in fact, things beyond the solution building itself, how this will be used, right? Will it be an offline thing? Will it be like a model which I run once a month? Versus will it be a model which is online, and as the customer comes in, it's almost a real-time kind of a solution, right? So also I've touched upon the latency. Is it okay to take a while to give the result, or should it be less than 100 milliseconds or 200 milliseconds that you need the result, right? The solution that you are building, what is the urgency? Do you need a solution in 3 weeks or 6 months? Again, it has a big bearing on the kind of solution you're building. Also, one last thing I mentioned over here is incremental solutioning, meaning that sometimes what happens is, which is a very common occurrence, by the way, it's not an uncommon thing, that that there's an immediate need. So you start with a simpler solution, then you keep adding on to it, right? Version 2, version 3, and so on. And eventually you'll see that, it takes a while to get there, but eventually you are at the final version. But there is a journey. It's not the first time you don't get the final model, right? These are the kind of questions I would need to, these are the kind of considerations I have in my mind. And to resolve these, to get some answers, I would reach out to the PM, I would reach out to the engineering team. And here, I think in some places, the product manager has to step in and align the data science team and the engineering team on certain things as well, right? You do this part and let's do this, and so on and so forth, right? So these are the kind. In the example that we saw of the reviews, right? Reviews. Let's say ranking it took ranking as an objective, that which reviews should come up, right? That is the objective. If you have taken that, then there is multiple ways to solve this. Really, I can start with a very simple approach, saying that what. At the very first attempt at solving this, I will take, let's say, user helpfulness, okay, helpful or not helpful. I'll take a very nice metric around that. And I will take the length of the reviews at two basic features. This way, what I'll have is reviews which are lengthy and helpful, they will come at top. That could be the first level solution. I can build this very quickly in less than a month or a few weeks. But a better solution which I could think of is essentially, can I look at the text of it? Can I define what matters to the customers to purchase? Can I look at the information contained in the text? Looking at the information, can I then rank, or can I come up with an algorithm or a logic or some model to predict which customer segment, right? Ideally, right? Which customer segment in which category prefers which kind of reviews? That could be the ultimate level of solving I have, but do I have the time for it, right? So there's different levels of solutioning I can do, and there are a lot of considerations, and these are the kind of questions I would have, and I would need the PM also helps also to resolve some of these questions. Yep. Any
Rahim,
questions?
can you look at the last question in the doubt section and try to address that? Okay.
Let me just check. Right. The question is, do these overlaps create conflict sometime? If
no,
they do,
in the doubt section.
Oh, in the doubt section. Okay, 1 second. Okay, some companies don't integrate their data pipelines very well, starting from making the user aware of their product to receiving feedback from the user or CSM. Can data science teams succeed in such an environment, broadly speaking? Okay, so I think I understand to some extent where this, the thought behind this kind of a question, right? And in an ideal world for a data scientist, see, it should all be integrated very well, right? Customer makes some interactions on the website or something somewhere, right? And I get real time or near real time tracking or information about the customers, right? And not just the input data, but also what I do, what I make, that should go out, okay, very quickly. That is what the ideal world for a data scientist would be. The solutions, I have all the information I need very quickly, and whatever solution I make gets tried out and gets implemented very quickly. That is the ideal world. But of course, the world is far from ideal. And this does happen, by the way. And the reasons for this happening, right? So I think you're talking about a very specific context where maybe the structure or the integration is not so well. I'll tell you there is more reasons beyond that. The reasons beyond that, it's not just maybe the integration or the pipelines. The reasons could be that whatever model as a data scientist I have made, I'm not able to communicate that this is, I'm not able to convince people that this is a great model. Maybe the PM is not convinced, right? Maybe what happens is, both PM and the data scientists are convinced we have done something very well, but we are not able to convince through results the other people, right? So there are many situations in which, say, data science builds some solutions, PM builds some solutions together with data science, and doesn't see the light of the day. And while it can be a bit demotivating, I would say data science team should look at this as a challenge, as a this is a key skill in data science. It is in my mind, because you would be very good with your data science techniques and so on, but can you really make business understand the importance? Can you really sell it to the business, right? Can you convince people, align people? So that's a very key thing, and I think it would be a challenge. It is a challenge. It is a general challenge. I would agree on that. But I think it is a challenge which all data science team need to start thinking about and starting to overcome this. Yep, I hope that answers your question, Surya.
Yeah, there are a few other questions. I think we'll touch upon those in the next few slides, so we'll skip it for now.
Okay, all right, sure.
So moving on to the next slide, right? After the modeling is done, the next part is about how do we kind of validate what we've built.
Sorry,
okay, there's a poll here.
There's a
okay,
poll
sure.
here. Right. So
I'll do one thing. I'll publish the poll. I can do it.
Okay.
It's fine.
Oh, you can do it. Okay, all right.
Yeah, guys, I've published it. Please send in your responses.
Yeah.
Come on, haven't received a single response till now.
Guys, respond. So this is the
It's
question.
quite
Okay,
simple, quite easy actually.
Yeah. So Ram, the question, if you can just explain to them as well again while you respond.
So what we're saying is the situation is that there is some poor experience in a critical business flow, and the need is to be to fix it in the immediate product release, which is going to happen in a couple of weeks' time, right? So in such a scenario, which of the following solution approaches would you adopt? Would you go for something which is hard coded? Would you go for some kind of simple rules, or you would want to build a state-of-the-art data science model to help fix it? 6 people have responded. Are the other people not listening?
Yes, it would be good to know your thoughts on this, right? This is how we understand what you understand. So it's always, please.
It's kind of validation for us too, if you've been able to communicate the things that we want to in this session, right?
Yeah.
So I think 7 out of 9 guys have responded. So I'll just end the quiz right now. In the interest of time. Let's see what, 4 people have chosen the right answer, which is simple rules derived from data. And the other 3 have chosen, I don't know which one, but either of the 2 other options, right? So let's, if you can, Rahim, maybe go to the next slide and help them understand why we chose this.
Yeah. So the answer, or what we would pick in such a situation, is simple rules derived from data. See, I think you understand that state-of-the-art data science model is out of the picture here, right? There's no way you can develop a state-of-the-art model in 2 weeks. Right? It has to go live in 2 weeks. So what can you do? Options 1 and 2 are feasible options, but are they the sensible options? Option 1 is hard code basis the business team's inputs. The point is, if you are just hard coding things without looking at data and just going by the gut of the business team, then you're not really doing justice to a data science PM's role. Right? You would want to look at the data, what the data is telling you. And even if you want some hard coding or some rules, you would want to derive them from data. That's the best solution in this scenario. And of course, you may not have the entire data, but with whatever data you can get hands on, getting rules derived from data, listening to the data will be far better than just listening to some business person. Right? So that's but yeah, those of you who got this right, good. Those of you didn't, doesn't matter. We are all learning. Right. So going to the next part, Ram, you can take this.
Sure. So based on the discussions that you've had in the past, the data scientist builds the models and tests them, validates them with the metrics, and then comes up to you and says, see, here is a model. It's performing its own accuracy. And what do you think, right? And as a business side guy, as a product manager, what you need to do is start evaluating the model, looking at it at a different perspective, because you are evaluating it from a customer lens, right? So you try to critique the model as far as possible. You try to identify the scenarios where it might fail or might not fail. For example, the thing that Rahim was talking about earlier, he could build a very simplistic model which looks at the length of a review and prioritizes them in the ranking, and that could be the solution he comes up with. Now you might come up with, say, that a typical user can kind of abuse it by maybe repeating the sentence 10 times, and that would falsely kind of increase the weightage of that review and make it surface up on the top, right? So it could be a bad solution in those kind of scenarios, right? So as a PM, you need to identify different scenarios, both happy ones, both good ones and the bad ones, and evaluate if the model performs the right way in those scenarios, right? That is your prime role here.
Okay. Now, as a data scientist, what my key considerations here, key things I would want to look at is what are the right validation metrics, right? I have the model. How do I validate the model? Now, of course, if I have a training data, whatever, there is some notion of accuracy or whatever, but there's better ways to evaluate. Does whatever pattern I have learned, does it hold if I look at new data set and so on? Or do I need some sort of an A/B testing, if you people are aware, right? Some randomized experiment maybe to test if this model works better than the previous solution, right? And so on. And a very important consideration over here is alignment of the solution with the business metric. So I think because you talked of some of these metrics right now, Ram has spoken about platform level conversion, which is essentially if someone comes in, how many of them actually go ahead and buy, right? That's the conversion kind of a metric. Now, let's say I made a model, and after making a model, the model is doing really well in whatever I am evaluating on. And my metric, which I have chosen, is something like, people, I believe that people should find a helpful review helpful enough for them to click on it, okay? The helpful button, right? Let's say I optimize my model so that my goal is the click button. People clicking on the button is better for me. But let's say it comes out that people clicking on this, right? Just let's say, just as an example, right? Let's say you are writing funny, let's say comments over there, like sharing like random stuff, right? Sarcastic comments and so on, and those are getting a lot of likes, right? And they are coming up, but that is going against the business metric. So, or even in the case that let's say that wasn't really happening, but for example, reviews are being clicked or whatever for whatever reasons, but conversion on the platform is not increasing, or in fact, it is going down. In that case, it's a clear no. I cannot impact the platform level conversion metrics by using, it has to align with the business metrics and business objectives as well. Yeah. All right. So I'll go to the next one, Ram, then if there's no questions.
Yeah. I think
Rahim,
the last part is where we take the. Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt you. Should I launch mid-session poll?
Sure, yeah, do launch it. Maybe let's just take a few 30 seconds or so to respond to the mid-session poll. This is for us to understand later, right? How it goes and so on, and make future sessions for you better. So please respond to the mid-session poll. Isha, let's give them a few seconds, 30 seconds or so. By the way, meanwhile, for the people who who have done with the poll and so on, just a quick question: did you people already study something about what an A/B testing is or what an experiment is? Are you aware of what an A/B testing is? Let us know on the chat. Oh yeah, oh cool. You guys are all aware of the A/B testing framework. Perfect. Great. The next example would be good then. All right. I was wondering if you have the right example for you. All right. Okay. So Yasha, let me know if the poll is done.
Yeah, it is done. Thank you.
Oh, perfect. Okay. All right. So yes. So the final step. Yes, Ram. Okay, I can't hear Ram. Okay, so I think while Ram, I think I'm not able to hear him while he resolves issues, audio, and so on. So this is the final step, guys. Right? You have, as a PM, you have worked with the data science team together. You have developed a solution. This could have been over a month, or this could have been over 6 months, or this could have been the third version of a solution in 2 years, right? But you've come to a stage where you have finally have a solution. You have also validated that it may work, right? It will work in an experiment or analysis or whatever. Now is the part where you finally put the model, in put it out in the real world, or sort of the rubber hits the road kind of a thing, right? So this is where the model has to really start, acting or start functioning. This is the deployment phase, and where you really use the model to take actions and maintain it over the life cycle. So is Ram here? If he can talk about the product manager side of things.
Can you hear me now?
Okay, Ram is here. Okay.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
So this is where a PM actually comes back to the focus again, right? And your primary role becomes, how do I facilitate discussions between the data science team and the engineering team? Because in lot many cases, the data science team has built models which are probably need certain changes in the tech stack to integrate them with the production pipeline, either in terms of data consumption, or do they need offline processing or online processing, or what is the frequency at which the models should run, what kind of feedback loop should exist from the product back to the data science model. So there are a lot of points of discussion where engineering team needs to decide and kind of fine tune the tech stack to incorporate these data science models, right? So, and you have to facilitate these discussions and make them kind of align towards the end goal and move towards the same end goal, right? The second part as a PM is to come up with a clear phase out plan, because although you've tested out the models in an A/B experiment, it's still not out there in the open in a production environment, right? The problem is the data science models have been trained on a specific kind of data. It is quite possible that it kind of receives certain foreign data in a production environment and kind of starts failing or gives out some kind of unexpected results. So generally speaking, we would go to the phasing out plan, where we'll release it to maybe 20-25% of the users and kind of keep monitoring the health metrics. And if they don't send us any red flags, in a 2 weeks time, maybe increase it to 50% users, and then gradually kind of over a few weeks time, kind of roll it up to 100% users. So you come up with that strategy as to how do we roll it out. The third thing is kind of in the maintenance phase, right? You develop certain SOPs and you create the right dashboards and alerts to keep monitoring the performance of the models. And again, engineering needs to implement some of it. But as a product manager, where you come in is identifying or defining these metrics which are of key importance, which need to be tracked on a daily basis. And second, with help from operations team or business teams, create a SOP. By SOP, I mean standard operating procedure, where we define as to if the model fails, or if there is a customer escalation, why is this review being shown here, or why is this products reviews not looking in the right way order, right? These escalations could be from end customers or from internal business teams, whoever it might be. You establish an SOP to kind of investigate such complaints or issues and give them an appropriate response, and if required, actually take that as a feedback and discuss with the data scientist for further optimization.
So as a data science team, what I would look at is here, right? Here is where, for me at least, in the model that we have built and so on, this is where it finally gets implemented, right? And what we need to do over here is, make sure we are enabling the implementation. Like Ram said, there could be some fine tuning maybe in terms of the technology. Maybe I need to change the way my model is working. Maybe the latency is too high. So maybe I need to tweak things a little bit here and there, right? And so on. So depending on all of this, all these additional considerations, the model will finally be live or hosted somewhere, right? But it doesn't end there. Like Ram mentioned, it will be phased out. We'll also be monitoring this closely, right? Now, Ram was talking about monitoring some key health metrics, right? And these metrics, some of these could be the output metrics, like how many people are interacting and the key metrics like that. From a data science perspective, some of the metrics I would need to look at, which again I would need engineering help and therefore help from the PM, is I would want to measure or keep tracking how applicable my model is. So for example, the model I made is based on data from, let's say, this year, March. Okay, until March, it was all good. Now what has happened is this model was running fine and everything. Now, COVID came in. Post-COVID, I realized that behaviors of customers have changed. The categories in which the customers buy, they have changed. How they respond to the reviews, the pricing, everything has changed. Now, a key question to myself would be, the model which I had made earlier, is this still applicable? Or has the underlying data changed so much that the model is not usable? Right? While this should also come up in the metrics that Ram was mentioning, right? Monitoring these metrics. But as a data science team, I would need help in measuring these generally. The input features which have gone into it, how they are changing and so on. Other than this, I would also want to think about the whole life cycle, how it will be maintained. Again, how will we take feedback from, let's say, the customers, or whatever channels are there, right? Which we establish together with the PM. Okay, so this is the final part of this, where so to help this explanation a little more concrete, right? We'll take one more example, a brief one this time, where we will take a case where you will see how the PM and the data science team would come together. All right. So the reason I was asking you about an A/B experiment is this: we're taking an A/B experiment example, and we're talking about how this entire thing can go, and who does what at which phase, and who is the primary owner, right? And once you have these things clearly established, right, then working becomes easier. So you have to have a notion of a primary owner and a secondary owner in this, all right? So in an A/B experiment, see, broadly, the kind of steps that you have are, this is a very high level, right? It's just four. Oh, there is a, 1 second, let me just make it. This is why, okay, yeah, okay. Insights and recommendations, think of it as that, okay? There's four large steps, four broad steps. One is, first of all, you have to think about, when you go towards an A/B, what is your key metric? Which metric will you look at to say that this experiment is successful or not? And for you to do that, right, you also need to know how much do you expect it to change, okay? Now, for this to happen, PM will play a very key role over here. And Ram, if you want to expand on this, how you go about defining a key success metrics.
I think continue because I think we've touched upon it in the past slides, and I'll come
Okay,
in a little
all right.
bit.
Okay, sure. Yeah, so essentially, right, and this is the place where the PM plays the primary role. The PM is the one who has a domain understanding. He also would know in the past what kind of experiments you have tried and what are the industry benchmarks. Like Ram was talking about, this is the kind of metric Amazon US may have, or Snapdeal or Alibaba may have, and so on. So these kind of things, the PM would be the primary owner. The data science team will also be there, but it will be supporting the PM in making these decisions, maybe providing more data points to take these calls. Okay, so this is a very clear thing where the PM would be the primary owner. The second part is once the PM has defined that this is the key success metric that we want to look at, right? The data science team, this part will completely take over. Data science team now will have to look at the data, look at what kind of categories we have, look at the kind of traffic we are getting every day, and so on, right? The data science has to come back to the PM saying that with this metric and with this kind of improvement we expect, this is a necessary sample size we need per variation, and based on this is the duration that we should run the test for, because this is the eligible traffic we get. This part is completely owned by the data science team. Now, after this happens, after we have decided that this is how much you should run for and so on, what you need to do is you enable the experiment in a way, right? Enable experiment means that configure that people should actually see a test and a control, and if they come in, the tracking should be enabled. We should look at some key metrics, right? Are people clicking on this? Are people adopting this? If people are clicking on this, what is their conversion like, this, that, and so on. So they should ensure that the tracking is fine. It is, you can analyze the data later. It's not rubbish. It is coming in correctly, right? This, and also after it has run for the recommended duration, it has to be analyzed, right? And you have to establish some sort of a significance, right? That will come later. But while some data analysis or some post assessment needs to be done, whether at an overall level, whatever was really happening. This now is both data science and PM. Data science will take a little more primary role here, because it's about metrics and statistical significance and the statistical tests and so on. But this part, how to interpret this, right? The PM will be very important over here. To how do we interpret this, or what hypothesis do we have? Did it really work, and so on. Okay. Finally, after you have the verdict on whether the experiment was success or not, it doesn't end there. You also have to identify, were there patches where it did not work? Were there patches where it worked better than we expected, right? Also, if it did not work at certain places, are there any actions for us? Can we identify areas of improvement for this? Or maybe it does not work for customers belonging to a certain, let's say, age groups, right? Maybe they don't care about this funky button you added, right? Doesn't matter. So all of these you look at, and finally you take a call on determining the future course of action. Should you continue to invest in these kind of models, or you need to go back and think about how you approach this entire thing. Now this part again, this part is where the PM will take a lead role in this case, because the PM has the most intuition about why probably it failed in this section, or what the trade-offs really are, and so on. Right? So this is the part where the PM would take the lead, and data science team would then support the PM in enabling all these decision points. Right? So this is the overall A/B experiment in different places. I hope this clarifies the question from earlier, that about how do you work together if there's so much overlap. Right? Ram, if you have anything to add here.
No, I think I'm good. I think as a PM, like Rahim also mentioned, right? I think couple of things where you kind of come in handy. One is identifying the right success metrics and the exit criteria for the experiment. It could be in many cases also we run an experiment for 3 weeks and we actually don't see any significant change in the metrics over those 3 weeks, right? So you could have couple of things to go from there. Either you decide that I want to run the experiment for a longer time duration and then kind of conclude whether it didn't work, or you could immediately conclude that it's already being failing, so let's take a step back and try to relook at the problem with a different perspective and think about it, right? So as a PM, you need to kind of identify the right success metric and exit criteria and evaluate the experiment at intervals to kind of decide the road ahead beyond that. And second is in the recommendations part, right? The recommendation which the data scientist provides has to be kind of signed off by the PM.
Yep.
Like quite importantly, the final call taker whether to release a product or not is the PM's responsibility, and if it succeeds or fails is also his responsibility, and he's kind of accountable for that. So you have to be aligned with what the recommendations of the data scientist here are. I think those are the things from as a PM that you need to do. Let's move on to the next slide. Yeah, so here we are going to talk about some of the typical conflicts that generally data scientists and PMs kind of face while working on a common problem. And this was a question also which was asked in the doubt section. The first thing is while dealing with hypothesis, right? Where obviously a PM would come up with a lot of hypotheses based on his intuition and domain knowledge, but data scientist has to do a very good job of validating those hypotheses by like looking at the data and actually forming his own view whether that hypothesis is good enough to be tested or we directly reject it and not actually build for it, right? To give you an example, in this particular reviews example, let's say as a PM I come up with a hypothesis that people are generally doing shopping online either in the afternoon time period after they've had lunch when they're slightly free, or maybe after office hours in the evening 7 to 9 p.m. So that is where people have a higher kind of affinity to say even sharing reviews or feedback, right? That is a hypothesis I might have based on whatever knowledge I have as a PM. And a data science might come in and say that, see, I looked at the data. I don't see such patterns. It actually doesn't make any difference. People are equally kind of posting reviews or comments throughout the day. So I don't think this is a valid hypothesis. So that is where I think PM comes up with a lot of his insights, but TS needs to validate and kind of decide whether to work on it. The second primary conflict that we deal with is when it comes to the recommendations that we're talking about, right? In lot many cases, a model was built with a high amount of accuracy and data science metrics look very good. And because the data was good, the modeling was good and everything. But when we launched out with an AB, the business objectives actually didn't move, or they moved not significantly enough to justify the ROI that we're putting in, right? Or it moved in the other direction. So what do we do in such cases? Should we launch the product? Should we kill the product? Should we think about it in a different way? Those are things as a PM you need to decide. And the key thing while dealing with such conflicts is as a PM and as a data scientist working together, you need to keep the higher level picture in mind always. Like what is the core business problem and customer need you're trying to solve, right? It's not about I have spent 6 months in building this data science model and my effort will go waste if I kill the product. No, that is not the primary consideration you should have while kind of taking this decision. It has to be based on the business objective and customer need that you're trying to solve for. I think the third one, I think third and fourth, I think Rahim, you would want to take it over.
Yeah, I think the third one, I think Rami already touched upon it to some extent. But what happens, right? Let's say, we have done an A/B experiment, we have done a model and so on. And let's say from the experiment, it comes out that the click-through rate, okay, I did some models or whatever, right? And there is a search result, right, or whatever. And the some metric, the click-through rate or something, has increased from 30.1% to 30.15%. Right, and statistically, right, because I have, let's say, millions of customers, statistically it comes out to be significant. But does that statistical significance mean business significance? See, because again, like there could be some bias, right? That we have worked over this. This is a good model, and 0.05% increase, right, in the click through. But the PM may come back and say that, what, the ROI, phasing out, the resources in engineering and everything, they're not worth the 0.05 effort, right? So the PM here may say the ROI is not enough. So this is another important, important way these balances come in place. And the final one is novelty versus practicality. Now, this is admittedly, us DS folks have a tendency to prefer something which is more novel, right? I mean, there is inherently we prefer that, this model, if I just took some more time, I can really try this nice model, which will give me far more benefit, right? It'll be amazing. So there is some preference to novelty. And what it can really do is it can affect the launch times. Instead of taking a month and launching this, I may end up proposing a method which takes 3 months, right? And it definitely increases launch times. Accordingly, what you can also do is, the resourcing is affected, right? Solving a problem quickly with one data scientist versus solving the problem over a duration with two data scientists and a mentor, whatever, right? It affects the resourcing as well. So here again, the PM may have to come in and say that, what, in this current situation, novelty is not the thing. We have to go live in 3 weeks, or a month. This is what we have to do. Right? So PM has to come in and play that balancing role as well. Okay.
So just to chip in here, right? Like a couple of things, right? One, I think what as a PM you need to realize is when a data scientist is giving a lot of time and effort in building the model, right? It becomes his baby. So Rahim actually touched upon that fact that there might be biases which creep in, right? Where he's trying to justify the model that is kind of built over time, right? And as a PM, you need to kind of help him identify those biases and kind of help him look at it at the customer lens in mind and not kind of get drawn over by the effort that is put in, right? Having said that, even PM would have biases. For example, in the hypothesis creation phase, he might use his knowledge and kind of have his biases, and that is where a data scientist kind of do and put the reality check there, right? So both of them are actually trying to play a devil's advocate and trying to fine tune the problem and the each of their inputs. There's a question about in the doubt section which I would like to address right now, which is, could you share an example of how data science helped solve a problem for an internal product, and how do you identify key success metrics for those? Yeah, it could be slightly more tricky, like you've asked, but there are easy ways to identify metrics. Like I'll give you an example that I'm working on right now, also, right? So where we are trying to build a product which will help us understand where is that we do not have enough selection of enough product catalog in Flipkart, and how do we kind of bridge that gap, right? So we are trying to build a product, for example, looking at internal signals, identify where there is demand, but we do not have enough product supply, and then work with our business teams to increase supply there, right? Now this is an internal product. It is to drive insights for our internal stakeholders so that they can work on it. Now, how do we define the right metrics? I think one, obviously, you need to drive adoption. If people find value in it, they will start using it. And our business ops are very huge in nature, right? And if they don't see value, they will not use it. They will not consume the recommendations that we provide. So adoption can be a key metric. Second is obviously the validation of it, which can be a lagging metric, but it is a metric. Let's say we derive these insights and give it out to our internal business stakeholders. They work on it and bring in the selection. Does it actually lead to better conversion in the user's mind? So what you have to realize is everything that you're building, even if it's an internal product, it is to enable internal stakeholders to perform their job effectively. And by doing so, it will actually lead to better results for the company as a whole. Either they will free up some bandwidth, which they can utilize for some other stuff. So it is a cost reduction or operational overhead reduction, or they can actually they're getting insights which they can use to improve our user customer journey, which will help us improve conversion, right? So as a PM, you need to again keep that end goal in mind, and that is where you'll can be able to come up with the right success metrics. I think it's time for a poll, so I'll deliver the next poll that we have.
Should we just skip the poll because it's 1 minute overdue anyway?
Okay, sure. Let's go over to the final slide then. Yeah, the final. This is our last slide on the session. So this is about, I think, as a PM, this is more of a concluding slide where we need to understand that as a PM, you're actually working as a facilitator while building a lot of these products, right? So you are working with analytics, and data scientists are building the model for you. You're working with engineering, who is actually trying to deploy the model and make it production worthy. Then you're working maybe with legal teams, because a lot of the data that you generate might have considerations around, is it legal to store it in our database? Is it, do we have a permission to use that data in a production environment, right? So you have to work with legal to kind of understand those nuances and clear it off. So many times you are the guy who understands all of these nuances and do the balancing act, right? So you act as a glue between all these collaborating teams. So first thing you need to do is align the leadership team and the entire org in the business goal that you're trying to solve for and the criticality of it, so that if they get convinced about it, they actually allow resourcing around it and build a team around it who can solve for the problem. And it comes in handy while you're trying to build the problem as well. Like whenever there are conflicts, you need to take a step back and help understand every stakeholder about the bigger goal again, so that they keep their biases and conflicts aside and kind of look at the bigger picture and try to move forward. The other thing which was again asked by someone in the doubt section as well, where do we start engaging with the data scientists and engineering? I think these have to be continuous in nature, and each of them providing feedback on a regular basis, so that they don't diverge in directions which become useless in a later stage, right? Let's say for example, data scientists are building a model and writing the code in R, right? But we realize that probably writing the code in Python is much more easy to integrate with the production tech stack, right? So now if we engage with engineering in a very later stage where the model has been fine-tuned and everything has been done, and engineering says that it's not integratable with the tech stack, then it becomes a problem. So you as a PM need to enable these conversations as frequently as possible, so that these can be identified and solved at the earliest possible time frame, right? The next thing is create accountability, right? Because there might be situations where we don't know who is supposed to do what. In many cases, a data scientist might help actually end up building certain pipelines. For example, to give an example, right? A data scientist built a model. Now, if you have to launch it out in production, it needs a web service to be created, an API to be created. So does the data scientist create the API? So does the engineering create an API, right? These kind of discussions actually happen on a real scenario in a business environment, and I've faced that personally, right? And that is where you as a PM need to come in, have open discussions about some of these conflicts, create the right amount of accountability and ownership, so that everyone is aligned from the beginning. It doesn't lead to any kind of confusion in a later stage. The last one, which is probably the most important thing in all of this, right? Which is, as a PM, you need to understand that the harder part of actually building the models and deploying them is actually being done by the data scientists and engineering, right? And you are actually enabling them. So you have to make sure that they feel rewarded enough. They get the right credit in the right time, so they are motivated enough and keep going for the end goal, right? There will be situations where they feel that I'm not able to make progress, or I've put in so much effort, this is not going live, so my effort is wasted, or there would be so many questions which might come up in their mind. So make sure that they continue to remain motivated and build for the end goal in mind, right? So I think as a PM, you need to keep these things in mind and enable all your stakeholders to and kind of align them on the larger goal. Rahim, you want to add anything?
Yeah, I mean, so all I'd say to these future PMs, right, who I may work with in the future, possibly, right? So I think Ram summarized it very well. The only thing I may want to add here is that, as a data scientist working with the PM, from the PM, right, while I understand the data very well, I may have certain hypotheses. I understand that the PM's intuition is not something I can get, right? So I look to the PM to give me inputs around there. At the same time, I realize that there are some places, right, where I may have certain, preferences and so on. The PM plays a very critical role in fact, like Ram mentioned, right, we should balance out each other. I should, validate his hypotheses. He should come and tell me, right, that this works, this probably doesn't work, this is a better idea, and so on. So I think for a data scientist, the PM is a very critical partner. And like I mentioned, PM will bring in those checks and balances and the kind of intuition that we lack, and that actually makes us far more effective than we would be otherwise, right? So, yeah, and good that you
more or less,
about
like, the thing that you need to keep in mind is both the stakeholders are trying to work toward the same goal, and both their questions and everything help actually enrich the discussions and the product that you're trying to build, right? So that is the core thing we need to keep in mind as a PM or a data scientist. Yeah. So I think we are done with the slides. Rahim, go ahead.
Yeah, I think Ram, what you already mentioned, right, or what they have already noticed by now is that there is a significant overlap at each step of the problem solving, they also see that there is an overlap in the kind of objectives you have. So I think it is very clear that the end goal is same for both parties. It's just the way they approach here and there slightly differs, and both of them together come together very well to solve the problem. Okay. Yep, that's all I had to add. Yeah.